She stood between the rifles and the man they called dangerous, and said something that made the entire town fall silent. The rope cut into his wrists as the wind pushed dust across the canyon floor, and somewhere behind her, a horse stamped hard against the ground. Lydia stepped forward anyway, boots scraping over stone, her hand lifting before anyone could stop her. No one moved. Not the sheriff, not the men with guns, not even the cowboy beside her. And in that stillness, she took one more step, closer than anyone expected. What made her stand there, when she had every reason to walk away? Stay with me, and tell me what you think. Dust Creek sat quiet under a pale Montana sky, the kind that looked wide enough to swallow a person whole if they stood still too long. The church bell had stopped ringing an hour ago, but the crowd hadn't thinned yet. Folks lingered out front, boots scuffing the packed dirt, voices low and curious. Lydia Grant stood off to the side, near the hitching posts where the horses flicked their tails at flies. She kept her hands folded in front of her, fingers pressed together like she was holding something that might slip away if she loosened them. Her dress had been mended more than once. The hem hung uneven. Dust clung to the fabric no matter how often she brushed it off. Men passed her in twos and threes. Some slowed. Most didn't. A few glanced her way, then past her, like checking the weather before deciding it wasn't worth thinking about. One man with a red scarf stopped long enough to tilt his head. "Not her," he said, not quiet enough to be kind. His friend chuckled. "You'd have to pay me." They moved on. Lydia didn't follow them with her eyes. She kept looking at the ground just ahead of her boots, where the dirt had been worn smooth by years of Sunday gatherings and trading days. A small stone shifted under her toe. She nudged it back into place. Across the yard, Earl Grant stood with his thumbs hooked in his suspenders, voice rising above the others. "She's strong," he was saying. "Works harder than most men I've seen. Don't complain neither." Someone asked a question Lydia couldn't hear. Earl waved a hand like he was brushing off a fly. "Take her for nothing if that's what it comes to. I've got 5 mouths already. Don't need a 6th. A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Not loud, not cruel enough to start a fight. Just enough to settle in the air and stay there. Lydia's shoulders drew in a little tighter. A boy ran past her, chasing another with a stick. His elbow clipped her arm. She didn't move, didn't say a word. The boy didn't look back. Near the church steps, a woman dropped a coin while digging through her purse. It hit the ground with a dull clink and rolled, slow and uneven, until it came to rest near Lydia's shoe. The woman kept talking, didn't notice. Lydia bent, picked it up between 2 fingers, and held it out. "Ma'am," she said. The woman glanced over, took the coin without meeting her eyes. No thank you. No pause. Just a hand taking what was hers and turning away again. Lydia lowered her arm. Her hand stayed open a second longer than it needed to, then closed. The crowd shifted. Names were called. Deals made quiet and quick. A man led a young woman toward the road, her small bag swinging at her side. Another pair followed not long after. Bit by bit, the yard emptied. Earl stopped talking. He looked around once, slow, like he might have misplaced something and wasn't sure where to start looking. His gaze passed over Lydia without settling. Then he turned toward the wagon, already reaching for the reins. Lydia waited. No one said her name. The church door creaked as someone pushed it shut from the inside. The sound echoed across the yard, wood meeting wood, final in a way that didn't need explaining. Lydia drew a breath. Let it out slow. She walked to the bench where she'd set her small canvas bag. The strap was worn thin at one end. She adjusted it without looking down, then lifted it over her shoulder. Her feet started toward the road. Gravel crunched under her boots. Each step felt louder than it should have, like the ground was trying to make a point of her leaving. She didn't turn around. Not when Earl climbed onto the wagon. Not when the wheels started moving. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dry grass and horse sweat. It pushed against her back, as if urging her along. At the edge of the yard, near the line of hitching posts, she slowed just enough to pass between two horses. One stamped its hoof. Another snorted, tugging lightly at its reins. That was when she felt it. Not a sound, not a word. Just the weight of someone looking. Lydia lifted her eyes. A man stood a few yards away, one hand resting on the saddle of a dark bay horse. He hadn't moved with the others. Hat low, coat worn at the edges, boots planted like he'd been there long before the crowd and planned to stay after. He was looking straight at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. Lydia held that gaze for a second. Maybe two. Long enough to notice he didn't shift, didn't glance away, didn't pretend he hadn't been watching. Her grip tightened on the strap of her bag. Then she stepped past the horses and onto the road, the sound of her boots fading into the wide, open quiet beyond the churchyard. Behind her, the man did not move. Behind her, the man did not move. Lydia had taken no more than 10 steps onto the road when she heard the soft creak of leather and the quiet shift of weight behind her. Not hurried, not calling out. Just there. She kept walking. The road out of Dust Creek stretched thin and pale, cutting through dry grass that whispered against itself in the wind. A wagon rattled somewhere far off. A dog barked once, then went quiet again. Bootsteps came after her, slow, measured, not trying to catch up, not falling away either. Miss. The word carried low. It didn't push. It didn't ask for anything. Lydia stopped. She didn't turn right away. Her hand tightened on the strap of her bag, fingers pressing into the worn canvas until the fabric creased. Then she turned, just enough to see him over her shoulder. He stood a few paces back, hat still low, one hand resting near his belt. Up close, he looked older than she first thought. Lines at the corners of his eyes, sun in his skin, a stillness about him that didn't feel like hesitation. "I've got work," he said. That was all. Lydia turned the rest of the way, facing him now. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair and dragged it across her cheek. She didn't brush it away. He nodded once toward the open land beyond the ridge. "Stone Ridge. Small place. Needs hands." No smile. No persuasion. "You can take it," he added, after a second. "Or leave it." Silence settled between them. Lydia studied him the way she'd learned to study people, looking for the thing behind the words, the shift in weight before a demand, the glance that meant something else was coming. He didn't move. A fly landed on his horse's flank. The animal flicked its tail, stamping once. He didn't reach to calm it. Didn't seem to need to. "You paying?" she asked. Her voice came out steady, quieter than she expected. He gave a small shrug. "Room, food, some coin, if the season's good." "That all?" "That's all." Another stretch of wind moved between them, carrying dust that settled on her boots, on the hem of her dress. Lydia glanced past him, back toward town. The church roof caught the light. The yard stood empty now. No one was coming after her. She looked back at him. "Why me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze held hers, not sharp, not soft, just there. "Didn't see anyone else asking," he said. Not kind, not unkind, just true. Lydia let out a breath she hadn't meant to hold. It came out thin, almost like it belonged to someone else. The horse beside him shifted again. Leather creaked. The sky above them stretched wide and pale, cloudless and indifferent. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "Fine," she said. He nodded once. No surprise in it. He turned without another word, reached for the reins and swung into the saddle in one smooth motion. The horse settled under him like it knew the shape of him. Lydia stood there a second longer. Then she stepped forward, slower this time, and took hold of the spare reins tied to the back of his saddle. The second horse waited, head low, patient. She pulled herself up, not graceful but steady enough. Wyatt, she would learn his name later, did not look back when she mounted. He clicked his tongue once. The horse beneath him stepped forward. They moved out of Dust Creek without ceremony. No one watched them go. The road climbed gently at first, then turned rough, stones pressing up through the dirt. Lydia kept her distance behind him, just far enough that she could see the set of his shoulders, the way he leaned with the rhythm of the horse. Once her horse stumbled on a loose rock. The jolt ran up her spine, sharp enough to make her grip tighten. Wyatt didn't turn, but his pace slowed, just a little. Enough. They rode like that for a long while. Wind, hooves, the quiet stretch of land that didn't ask questions. By the time the sun began to dip, the air had cooled. Shadows stretched long across the ground. A line of trees appeared ahead, dark against the ridge. The ranch came into view slow. A small house, weathered boards, a narrow porch, fencing that had been mended more than once, posts leaning just enough to show time had passed there. A barn off to one side, a pump near the well, no extra movement, no crowd, just a place that held together because someone kept it that way. Wyatt dismounted first. He tied off his horse, checked the cinch like it mattered, then stepped aside. Lydia slid down from hers. Her boots hit the ground harder than she intended. Dust rose around her ankles. A door opened. An older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair was pinned back tight, eyes sharp but not unfriendly. She took in Lydia in one glance. Dress, bag, face. Then she nodded. "That yours?" she asked Wyatt. He shook his head. "No." That was all that passed between them. The woman, Miss Ada, though Lydia didn't know it yet, stepped back and held the door open. Not wide, just enough. Lydia hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The room smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long on the stove, and wood smoke that had settled into the walls. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf with tin cups lined up uneven. Wyatt didn't follow her right away. She heard him outside, the low murmur of him working, the sound of a bucket filling. A moment later, he set something down by the door. Lydia glanced over. A metal pail, fresh water, a dipper resting inside. She looked back toward the doorway. He was already walking away. Night came quick in the hills. The sky turned deep blue, then darker still. Lydia lay on the narrow bed in the small room they'd shown her. The blanket was rough but clean. The window rattled faintly with the wind. She kept her eyes open, listening. No footsteps outside her door. No voice calling her name. No hand reaching for the latch. The silence stretched long, so long it began to feel like a weight pressing down on her chest. Lydia turned onto her side, staring at the thin line of moonlight on the floor. Nothing happened, and somehow that made it harder to breathe than anything she had expected. Morning came slow over Stone Ridge. Light slipped in through the thin curtains, pale and steady. Lydia sat up before the sun reached the far wall. She listened first, the same as the night before. No voices raised, no doors slammed, just the low clink of metal from outside. A bucket set down, a gate hinge complaining once, then settling. She stood, smoothed her dress with both hands, and stepped out. Wyatt was already at the corral, checking a line of posts along the fence. He worked with quiet care, testing each board like it mattered. Miss Ada stood by the stove inside, pouring coffee into a chipped tin cup. She set a second cup near the edge of the table without looking up. Lydia hesitated at the doorway, then stepped in, picked up the cup, and held it between her hands. The heat stayed there longer than she expected. No one asked where she had come from. No one asked where she planned to go. By midweek, Wyatt told her they were heading into town. He didn't say why, just handed her a pair of worn gloves and nodded toward the saddles. They rode out under a sky that looked colder than it felt. The road dipped and rose through dry hills, cutting past scrub and rock. Lydia kept her place behind him at first. Then, without noticing when it changed, she moved a little closer. Dust Creek looked the same as it had days ago. Same church, same narrow street. Same men leaning against the rail outside the general store like nothing ever moved unless they said it could. They stopped by the stock pens. Wyatt spoke with a buyer, low and even. Lydia stayed near the horses, fingers resting on the leather reins. Eyes found her. They always did. A man stepped out from the saloon, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked Lydia up and down, slow enough to be noticed. "That your new help?" he called to Wyatt. Wyatt didn't answer. The man smirked. "Looks like charity to me." A couple of others laughed. Not loud, just enough. Lydia shifted her weight. Her hand tightened on the reins until the leather creaked. She kept her eyes on the ground, on the scuffed boards beneath her boots. Inside the cafe, the air smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. Wyatt pushed the door open and stepped in. Lydia followed a step behind. The woman behind the counter glanced up. Her eyes moved from Wyatt to Lydia, then back again. Something closed off in her face. "We're full," she said. There were 3 empty tables. Wyatt didn't argue, didn't ask again. He nodded once, like he'd heard something expected, then turned and walked back out. Lydia followed him into the daylight. They stood beside the hitching rail. The wind had picked up, carrying grit that stung the back of her neck. Wyatt reached into his coat, pulled out a small paper-wrapped bundle, and handed it to her. She didn't take it at first. He held it there, steady. After a moment, she reached out and took it, warm through the paper. He unwrapped his own portion, took a bite, chewed like it was nothing special. Lydia watched him. Then she opened hers. Bread, a slice of meat, still warm. She didn't eat right away, just held it. Waited. When he took another bite, she did the same. They ate standing there out in the open, while people passed and pretended not to look. A shadow fell across them. Sheriff Nolan Pike stepped up, coat unbuttoned, badge catching the light. He looked at Wyatt first, then let his gaze settle on Lydia. "That your business now?" he asked. Wyatt wiped his hand on a cloth. "Work hand." The sheriff's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Best keep your work quiet, Cole. Folks around here don't like surprises." His eyes lingered on Lydia a second longer than they needed to. Then he tipped his hat and moved on. The rest of the day passed in pieces. A sale made. A receipt folded and tucked into Wyatt's pocket. A sack of feed loaded onto the back of the wagon. Lydia kept her distance. Not far. Just enough. On the ride back, the sky turned a dull gray. Wind moved low across the hills, carrying the smell of something coming. They were halfway to Stone Ridge when Wyatt slowed. A shape lay off the side of the road. Small wagon. One wheel broken clean through. A horse stood nearby, trembling, one leg lifted off the ground. Lydia saw it at the same time he did. Wyatt dismounted without a word. She followed. A woman sat against the wagon, dress torn at the sleeve, hair fallen loose around her face. Her eyes were open, unfocused, fixed somewhere past them both. Wyatt crouched beside her, said something low Lydia couldn't hear. The woman flinched at his voice. Lydia stepped closer, slow. "It's all right," she said, keeping her hands where they could be seen. The woman's gaze shifted, found Lydia, stayed there. Something in her shoulders eased, just a little. Wyatt moved careful, checking her arm, her side. He worked with the same quiet steadiness he used on the fence back at the ranch. No rush, no show. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, they had the wagon tied up and the woman settled across the back of Wyatt's horse. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Back at Stone Ridge, Miss Ada didn't ask questions. She cleared a space by the fire, set water to boil, and handed Lydia a clean cloth. Lydia knelt beside the woman, pressing the cloth to a cut along her arm. The woman winced, then went still. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose board by the porch. Inside, the fire burned steady. Wyatt stood in the doorway a moment, watching them. Then he stepped out into the dark. By morning, the story had already started traveling. It moved the way dust did in Dry Creek, quiet at first, then everywhere all at once. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, a rider had already passed the lower trail. By noon, someone had stopped at the fence and looked too long before moving on. Inside, the house held its usual shape. Miss Ada stirred a pot near the stove. The rescued woman lay on the narrow cot, her breathing steadier now, her arm wrapped in clean cloth Lydia had tied herself. Wyatt moved in and out of the doorway, fixing a loose hinge, mending what needed mending like nothing had shifted. Lydia worked at the table, cutting strips of cloth with a small knife. Her hands moved sure. Slower than yesterday, more certain. Every so often she glanced toward the door, not at Wyatt, at the space beyond him. The wind changed sometime in the afternoon. It came down the ridge colder, carrying the faint echo of hooves before they could be seen. Wyatt paused. He didn't look at Lydia, didn't say a word. He just set the hammer down on the workbench and wiped his hands once on his shirt. The sound came clearer now. More than one horse. Heavy. Certain. Miss Ada stopped stirring. The woman on the cot shifted, eyes opening wide, breath catching in her throat. Lydia stood. The first rider came into view over the rise. Then another. Then three more behind them. Dust followed like a shadow. Sheriff Nolan Pike rode at the front. They didn't slow until they reached the fence. Boots hit the ground one after another. The gate creaked open without asking permission. Wyatt stepped forward, just far enough to meet them in the yard. Lydia stayed where she was, close enough to see. Not close enough to be part of it. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, voice even. Wyatt nodded once. The sheriff's eyes moved past him, toward the house, toward the open door, toward Lydia standing just inside the threshold. "Got word you picked something up off the road," he said. Wyatt didn't answer right away. "Woman was hurt," he said finally. "That's so." The sheriff stepped closer. Close enough now that the dust on his boots settled over the porch boards. "We got folks saying you've been bringing trouble back with you," he went on, "keeping things that ain't yours to keep." The men behind him shifted, hands resting near their belts, not drawing, just waiting. Inside, the woman on the cot turned her face away. Lydia noticed. Wyatt noticed too. He didn't look at her. "Nothing here but what's needed," Wyatt said. The sheriff's mouth tightened, just a fraction. "That ain't how folks see it." He nodded once. Two of the men moved forward. They didn't rush, didn't raise their voices. They simply stepped around Wyatt and reached for his arms. Lydia's breath caught. Wyatt didn't pull away. He let them take hold, let them turn him. The rope came out next, rough and ready, looped around his wrists. The fibers scraped against his skin. Still, he didn't resist. The yard held its breath. Lydia took one step forward. No one looked at her. "Hold on," she said, Her voice didn't carry far. One of the men glanced her way, then back to his work. "She was hurt," Lydia said again, louder this time. "He didn't—" The sheriff raised a hand, not even looking at her. "That's enough." The words landed flat, like they had been said before, many times, to many people. Lydia stopped. Her hands fell to her sides. Wyatt lifted his head then. Just once. His eyes found hers across the yard. He didn't shake his head, didn't nod, just looked, then lowered his gaze again. They led him toward the horses. The rope pulled tight. He followed without stumbling. Miss Ada stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes sharp and quiet. She didn't speak. No one did. The riders mounted again, Wyatt among them now, tied to the saddle. The sheriff turned his horse without hurry. Dust rose as they rode off, back the way they came. The sound of hooves faded. Silence filled in behind them. Lydia stood in the yard long after they were gone. The wind moved around her, lifting the edge of her dress, pressing it back down again. Inside, the rescued woman shifted on the cot. "Safer this way," she murmured, almost to herself. Lydia didn't answer. That evening, the light went soft over Stone Ridge. Shadows stretched long across the yard. The tools Wyatt had left lay where they were. Nothing moved them. Miss Ada set a plate on the table, left it there. Lydia didn't touch it. Night came. The house settled into its quiet again. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed in the small room, hands resting on her knees, the same as the night before. But not the same. Her eyes moved once toward the door, then to the window, then back again. After a long while, she stood, walked into the main room. The table held a lantern turned low. Beside it, a small ring of keys lay near the edge. Miss Ada must have left them there, or forgotten. Lydia stood over them. Her hand hovered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she picked them up. The metal felt cold. She wrapped them in a cloth and slipped them into her pocket. No sound. She moved to the door, opened it slow. The hinge whispered. Outside, the night air cut sharper than before. The barn stood dark against the sky. Lydia stepped down from the porch and crossed the yard, her boots pressing into the dirt without hurry, without pause. Inside the barn, she found the saddle, the rope, the quiet breath of the horses shifting in their stalls. She worked by feel more than sight. Leather, buckle, knot. Her hands didn't shake. When she led the horse out, she didn't look back at the house. Not once. The horse moved under her steady hands as Lydia guided it along the narrow trail, the reins held firm but not tight. The night air cut clean through the hills, sharp with pine and cold stone. Behind her, Stone Ridge faded into shadow. Ahead, only the faint line of the road and the memory of where they had taken him. She rode without rushing. Hoofbeats carried far in the quiet. She kept to the edge of the trail where the ground softened the sound. A lantern flickered once in the distance, then disappeared as she dipped into the low valley. By the time she reached Dust Creek, most lights had gone dark. The jail sat at the far end of town, a squat building with a single lamp burning outside, its glow weak against the night. Lydia dismounted in the alley beside it. She tied the horse low, out of sight, then stood still for a moment, listening. A chair creaked inside, a low cough. Then silence again. She moved. The side door was locked. She tried it once. Quiet. The handle didn't give. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the cloth-wrapped keys. Metal clicked softly as she worked them free, one by one. The second key turned, The door opened just enough to let her slip through. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and damp wood. A lantern burned low on a desk near the wall. A hat rested beside it. No one there. The cells stood at the back, iron bars catching the dim light. Wyatt sat on the narrow bench, hands bound in front of him now. His head lifted when the door eased shut behind her. He didn't look surprised. Lydia stepped closer. Each footfall slow, measured. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Same tone as always, calm, certain. She didn't answer. She knelt, setting the keys down beside her. Her fingers moved to the rope around his wrists. The knot was tight, rough. It had been pulled hard. She worked it loose anyway. The fibers gave under her hands bit by bit. "You don't have to do this," he said again. Lydia paused for just a breath, then kept going. The rope slipped free. Wyatt flexed his hands once, the marks already rising along his skin. He didn't stand right away, just watched her. Lydia picked up the keys again, moved to the cell door, found the lock by feel. It opened with a dull click. She stepped back. Wyatt stood. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lydia turned and headed for the door. No word, no signal, just movement. Wyatt followed. They stepped out into the night the same way she had come in. Quiet. Careful. The town held its breath around them. By the time the alarm came, a shout, distant, confused, they were already past the last building, moving toward the open land. They rode hard once they cleared the ridge. The wind pulled at Lydia's hair, stung her eyes, filled her lungs until it hurt. She didn't slow. Wyatt rode beside her now. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. They reached Broken Pass just before dawn. The canyon walls rose up around them, tall and close, cutting the wind down to a whisper. A narrow stream ran through the center, clear and cold over smooth stone. Lydia dismounted first this time. Her legs trembled when they hit the ground. She steadied herself with one hand against the saddle, then moved to gather kindling without being told. Wyatt watched her for a second, then turned to tend the horses. They worked in silence. Fire came slow, then caught. Water boiled. Cloth wrapped again around Wyatt's wrists, this time by Lydia's hands. She tied it tight. Clean. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, breath uneven. The sky had begun to lighten. Hoofbeats came again. This time, there was no mistaking them. Lydia stood. 5 riders appeared at the mouth of the pass, silhouettes against the rising sun. Sheriff Pike at the front. They didn't rush in. They spread out instead, blocking the way back. "End of the road," the sheriff called. Lydia stepped forward before Wyatt could. Her boots found the center of the narrow clearing. The ground there was firm, packed from old water flow. She didn't look back. "I'm not going," she said. Her voice carried clearer than she expected. One of the men shifted in his saddle. Another glanced at the sheriff. "You don't know what you're saying," Pike replied. "We'll take you back. Set things right." Lydia shook her head. "No." A rider moved forward, reaching down as if to pull her up. Her arm snapped back, fast, breaking the reach before it landed. The motion surprised them. It surprised her. Wyatt stepped up behind her then, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him without turning. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. The moment stretched. Wind moved through the pass, carrying the sound of water over stone. Finally, one of the riders exhaled hard. "They ain't hurting anyone." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He looked from Lydia to Wyatt, then back again. Something in his expression shifted. Not softer, just done. This isn't over, he said, but he didn't move forward. One by one, the riders turned their horses. The sound of hooves faded back the way they had come. Silence returned. Lydia stood there until the dust settled. Then her shoulders dropped. Just a little. She turned. Wyatt was right there. For the first time, she didn't look away. You were never what they said, he told her. Simple. Quiet. She swallowed once, hard, like something had finally found its way free. Her hand lifted, hovered, then closed around his. He didn't pull her closer, didn't tighten his grip, just held on. They stood like that beside the stream, morning light breaking across the rocks. After a while, Lydia stepped to the water's edge. She looked down. The surface moved just enough to blur the edges. Sunlight caught in it, shifting, breaking apart, and coming back together again. She didn't turn away. Behind her, Wyatt's voice came, low and steady. You're perfect to me. Lydia let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The wind moved through the pass, softer now. She stayed where she was, and for the first time she didn't feel the need to go anywhere else. If you stood there where Lydia stood, with the past still echoing behind you and the unknown stretching out ahead, what would you choose? Safety that never saw you, or a life that asked you to stand? Even when your voice shook, she wasn't the woman that town had named her. Not the one left behind in a churchyard. Not the one waiting to be chosen. She became the one who stepped forward, even when no one was ready to follow. And maybe that's the quiet truth this story leaves behind. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with promises or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a hand that doesn't pull away. A place where you're not asked to shrink. A voice that reminds you of who you were before the world told you otherwise. And healing. It doesn't come all at once. It shows up in small things. In staying. In choosing. In not turning away from your own reflection. So if you've ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere, maybe the question isn't where you fit. Maybe it's where you decide to stand. Tell me this. If you were Lydia, would you have walked back or stayed? And if stories like this find their way to you, there are more waiting just over the next hill. Quiet ones, hard ones, the kind that stay with you long after the fire burns low.